The issue surrounding sex testing in sports may seem like a new phenomenon, but this has been coming up at least since women were allowed to compete in the Olympics. So, for like the past century or so, there's a whole lot of concern over who is allowed to compete in women-only sports, and various solutions have been aimed at allaying those concerns. But are they effective? Do they make sense? That's the topic of this week's Healthcare Triage. In the 8th century BC Olympic Games in ancient Greece, not only were women barred from participating, they weren't even allowed to attend. When the modern Olympics began in 1896, the idea of female athletes was unthinkable for a lot of people. It became somewhat more common a couple decades later, but not significantly so until the later 1940s. Participation really started ramping up after that, and over 600 women competed in the 1960 Rome Games. While this was an improvement, more than 4,700 men competed in those same games. And now, in 2024, for the first time ever, half the Olympic competitors were women. It's been a long road for women in sports, and early on in the journey, they had to start proving they were female in order to compete. In 1966, the International Amateur Athletics Federation introduced a program of gender verification. This move is credited to fears of men pretending to be women in order to compete in women-only events. Sources also suggest that the earliest sex testing in sports began in response to suspicions about women being more male than female, whatever that means. At one point, leading up to the 1968 Games, women had to undergo gynecological examinations to compete in women-only events. That practice was shortly replaced by laboratory testing of things like chromosomes and hormone levels. But is there scientific justification for these tests? The answer to that question is not really. We're typically taught that men have XY sex chromosomes and women have XX, that men have testes and women have ovaries, that men have high testosterone levels and women don't. But it's not actually that binary. Some individuals have XX chromosomes and testes, or XY chromosomes and ovaries. Some women have high testosterone levels. Some men have low testosterone levels. There are several variations on this theme. These and other conditions may qualify an individual as intersex, or DSD, differences or disorders of sex development. And it's not that uncommon. According to some estimates, some form of DSD affects between 1% and 3% of the population. That's between 82 and 246 million people. Between 105 and 315 participants in the 2024 Olympics, or between 52 and 157 women Olympians. This tends to complicate the idea of biological sex or biological advantages based on sex because there's not a consistent biological state of men and women, and people affected by DSD often don't even know it. It's perfectly common to, say, be assigned female at birth and be characterized as such throughout your life and be pretty comfortable with it, never having any idea that your biology somehow says otherwise. Okay, so maybe we can't easily biologically define man and woman, but we can measure a woman's testosterone, and we should definitely care that a woman with naturally high testosterone is competing against other women with lower levels, right? They would have an unfair advantage, right? While there's evidence that men have a physiological advantage over women in, for example, running, and likely due to a combination of factors, not just testosterone levels, there are no data comparing women against women. An intersex woman is unlikely to have the same biological characteristics as what we would generally define as a biological man. So does an intersex woman have a physical advantage over a non-intersex woman? The answer is, we don't know. And if we do someday find the answer to that question, it isn't likely to be straightforward. Given that the biology of different people can vary considerably, the answer would probably depend on a bunch of different factors. And in any case, how far exactly do we want to take this? If people can be eliminated from competitions based on their testosterone levels, because testosterone is known to stimulate muscle mass, which could be a key factor in performance, then should we eliminate them based on erythropoietin? Because that hormone has a lot to do with the number of red blood cells a person has, which could also be a key factor for high endurance. In fact, One man with 7 Olympic medals in cross-country skiing was found to have a genetic mutation for the erythropoietin receptor that resulted in a 25 to 50% increase in red blood cells. This gave him an enormous genetic advantage in obtaining those medals. But rather than this bringing up doubts about how fair things were for his competitors or casting doubt on his gold medal accomplishments, he's generally held in positive regard. For example, one article presents the discovery of his genetic mutation as exoneration because it refuted claims that he had artificially increased his red blood cell count. There are several other genetic components with evidence to suggest that they improve physical performance. This raises the questions. How do we define situations in which a natural advantage should disqualify people from sports? And why do we currently only regulate some of them? And why does that burden largely fall on women? We aren't here to say that we have the right answers for these complex questions, but we are here to say that this issue has far more complexity than we're seeing in mainstream conversations. Allowing or disallowing women to compete in sports based on these factors is not a binary issue. It has a lot of nuance. Hey, did you enjoy this episode? You might enjoy this previous episode on injuries and youth sports. We'd appreciate it if you'd like the video. Subscribe to the channel down below. Consider going to patreon.com/healthcaretriage. Support the show, make it bigger and better. We'd especially like to thank our research associate, Edward Lillaholm, and of course, our Surgeon Admiral, Sam.